is Michael Nix. I am from Chef, and I will be performing One Witness by Aggie Hurst. In 1921, a missionary couple named David and Sylvia Flood went with their 2-year-old son from Sweden to the heart of Africa, to what was then called the Belgian Congo. They met up with another young Scandinavian couple, the Ericksons, and the 4 of them sought God for direction. In those days of much tenderness and devotion and sacrifice, they felt led of the Lord to go out from the main mission station and take the gospel to a remote area. This was a huge step of faith. At the village of Endolera, they were rebuffed by the chief, who would not let them enter his town for fear of alienating the local gods. The 2 couples opted to go half a mile up the slope and build their own mud huts. They prayed for a spiritual breakthrough, but there was none. Their only contact with the villagers was a young boy who was allowed to sell them chickens and eggs twice a week. Sophia Flood, a tiny woman only 4 feet 8 inches tall, decided that if this was the only African she could talk to, she would try to lead the boy to Jesus. And in fact, she succeeded, but there was no other encouragements. Meanwhile, malaria continued to strike one member of the little band after another. In time, the Ericksons decided that they had had enough suffering and left to return to the central mission station. David and Sophia Flood remained near Endolera to go on alone. Then, of all things, Sophia found herself pregnant in the middle of the primitive wilderness. When the time came for her to give birth, the village chief softened enough to allow a midwife to help her. A little girl was born, whom they named Ina. The delivery, however, was exhausting, and Sophia Flood was already weak from bouts of malaria. The birth process was a heavy blow to her stamina. After 17 desperate days of prayer and struggle, she died. Inside David Flood, something snapped in that moment. His heart full of bitterness, he dug a crude grave, buried his 27-year-old wife, and took his children back down the mountain to the mission station. Giving his newborn daughter to the Ericksons, he snarled, "I'm going back to Sweden. I've lost my wife, and I can't take care of this baby. God has ruined my life." With that, he headed for the coast, rejecting not only his calling, but God himself. 8 months later, both the Ericksons were stricken with a mysterious illness and died within days of each other. The baby was given to an American missionary couple who adjusted her Swedish name to Aggie and brought her back to the United States at age 3. The family loved little Aggie, but were afraid that if they ever tried to return to Africa, some legal obstacle might separate her from them. So they decided to stay in America and switch from missionary work to pastoral ministry. And that is how Aggie grew up in South Dakota. As a young woman, she attended North Central Bible College in Minneapolis. There, she met and married a young preacher named David Hurst. The Hursts enjoyed a fruitful ministry. Years passed. On a vacation to Sweden, one day around 1963, a Swedish religious magazine appeared in her mailbox. She had no idea who sent it, and of course she couldn't read the words. But as she turned the pages, all of a sudden a photo stopped her cold. There, in a primitive setting in the heart of Africa, was a grave with a white cross, and on the cross was her mother's name, Sophia Flood. Aggie jumped in her car and drove straight to a college faculty member who, she knew, could translate the story. "What does this say?" she asked. The instructor translated the story. It tells about missionaries who went to Endolera long ago, the birth of a white baby girl, the death of a young missionary mother, the one little African boy who had been led to Christ, and how, after all the whites had left, the little African boy grew up and finally persuaded the chief to let him build a school in the village. This article said gradually he won all his students to Christ. The children led their parents to Christ. Even the chief had become a Christian. Today, there were 600 African people serving the Lord because David and Sevilla fled. One year, on a vacation to Sweden, Aggie sought to find her biological father. An old man now, David Flood had remarried and generally dissipated his life with alcohol. Still bitter, he had one rule in his family: never mention the name of God, because God took everything from me. After an emotional reunion with her half-brothers and half-sister, Aggie brought up the subject of seeing her father. The others hesitated. "You can talk to him," they replied, "even though he is very ill now. But you need to know that whenever he hears the name of God, he flies into a rage." Aggie could not be deterred. She walked into the squalid apartment with liquor bottles everywhere and approached the 73-year-old man lying in a rumpled bed. "Papa," she said tentatively. He turned and began to cry. "Ina," he said, "I never meant to give you away." "It's all right, Papa," she said. "God took care of," taking him gently in his arms. "God took care of me." The old man instantly stiffened. The tears stopped. "God forgot all of us. Our lives have been like this because of him." He turned his face back to the wall. Aggie stroked his face and continued undaunted. "Papa, I've got a little story to tell you, and it's a true one. You didn't go to Africa in vain. Mama didn't die in vain. That one little African boy you both won to Jesus Christ grew up to win that whole village to the Lord. That one seed you planted just kept growing and growing. Today, there are 600 African people serving the Lord because you and Mama were faithful to the call of God in your life. Papa, Jesus loves you. He has never hated you." He turned back to look into his daughter's eyes. His body relaxed. He began to talk, and by the end of the afternoon, he had come back to the God he had resented for so many decades. One year, on a vacation to Sweden, the Hursts were enjoying a high-level evangelism conference in London, England, where a report was given from the nation of Zaire, the former Belgian Congo. The superintendent of the National Church, representing some 110,000 baptized believers, spoke eloquently of the gospel spread in his nation. Aggie could not help going up afterwards if he had ever heard of David and Sevilla Flood. "Yes, madame," he replied. "It was Sevilla Flood who led me to the Lord. I was the boy who brought food to your parents before you were born. In fact, to this day, your mother's grave and her memory are honored by all of us." Then he continued, "You must come to Africa and see, because your mother is the most famous person in our history." In time, that is exactly what Aggie Hurst and her husband did. They were welcomed by cheering throngs of villagers. She even met the man who was hired by her father to carry her down the mountain in a soft hammock cradle. The most dramatic moment, of course, was when the pastor escorted Aggie to see her mother's grave, marked with a white cross, for herself. She knelt in the soil of Africa, the place of her birth, to pray and give thanks.